kind enough to light them, and I wanted to light them for each of our storytellers to thank them for kindling in our hearts the love of God that never dies away. I also want to do a time check. Okay, so when do I need to stop? Okay, I'm talking about that now. My task is to kind of weave together the stories that we've heard and to reflect on what Christian love means from more of a theological framework in light of these experiences. And I get to do that because my academic training is on systematic theology and constructive theology, which means build things out of thin air. But I've actually found that sometimes that's a little too abstract even for me. And actually, like Olympia, when I saw the title of the conference, I also thought of a song. It was a different song. It was a song by the Beatles, where they're reassuring us that all you need is love, love is all you need. I actually want to challenge that. I think in addition to love, we need yarn, knitting things. Add these things to our altar, but we also need a lot of justice, which I think, at least for me, that's sort of the common fiber, that's a common thread, that's a common yarn that is running through the stories that we heard. If I were to encapsulate that into a statement, what I heard from Erica, Linda, and Pia is that they have, as women, experienced a reality in which their existence was a problem for somebody else. So that the question now is, what does our understanding of the Christian gospel move us to say in face of such a statement? How are we called to respond when, in the name of the Christian gospel, someone is told, your existence is a problem for me? In the Christian tradition, particularly in the Christian West, in the 20th century, we have drawn on the work of a man named Anders Nygren, who was a Swedish theologian. He published 2 books in 1930, one in 1930, one in 1936, Eros and Agape. Eros and Agape, of course, are 2 Greek terms used that are translated into the English word love, and they describe different kinds of love. Eros, Nygren explained, is that kind of heady, passionate, lustful love. It's creative and wonderful and helps make the world go around, but it's not the best expression of Christian love. Christian love is agape, or agape. It is something that moves us to set aside the ego. It is kenotic, that is, it moves us to empty ourselves so that we can look out unconditionally for the other. And the reason why agape became the standard, the ideal, the definition of Christian love is because, again, that was how we were to understand Jesus' actions on the cross. That he gave up his life for us. The Philippians hymn describes it that way very clearly. At this point in the discourse of Christian theology, thankfully, Nygren's work is not, while it's still something you gotta read and you have to know what he says, there have been pushbacks from that, to that construction of an understanding of love. And they come from feminist theologians, among others, but particularly feminists. Part of the pushback from feminist theology was saying, But eros is that creative, powerful love that women's experience seem to demonstrate over and over again. And certainly the story that Linda cited, where Mary Magdalene becomes the apostle to the apostles. She's the one who reported the gospel to the people who were supposed to be closest to the gospel. And she is revered and held up that way. But at the same time, I didn't actually hear that phrase, Mary Magdalene, apostle to the apostles, until I was way up high in graduate school. I was more familiar with Mary Macliing being the woman who was filled with demons, or the woman who was caught in adultery, and that sort of gospel amalgamation that we received in Sunday school. So, again, even though we have these instances in the biblical text, which is one of our primary sources for theological reflection, that offers us insights into the way, or the fact that women aren't actually the moral problem for the church, we continue to sort of be blind to that. So again, what does our understanding of the Christian gospel move us to say when we are met with the statement, your existence is a problem for me? Reconciliation is often one approach that's used to respond. Reconciliation, the desire to figure out how to bring together two opposing perspectives, two opposing forces, and find a place for them to meet in the middle where transformation can happen and everything's wonderful, there's confetti and balloons, everybody's hugging, sometimes referred to as sloppy agape. That's love, but without the justice. And a friend of mine who has been doing a lot of anti-racism work as a white Christian social ethicist is proposing that maybe we need to start talking about reparations more as Christians. Now, before you reach for your pocketbooks and pat down the hatches, reparations has gotten kind of a bad rap. We often think of reparations as a call from angry people of color who want money to make things right. And that's not, that's part of the reparations conversation. But if we break down the word reparation, it actually comes from the word repair. Okay? So where reconciliation is a desire to try to figure out how to collapse differences so that people can experience some sense of unity, reparations is about trying to figure out how do we need to, what's the work that we need to do to repair the harm that's been done. And that actually needs to be the first step in moving toward reconciliation. Think about it as reparation is trying to build a bridge, rebuild a bridge that's been burnt down. What I like about my friend Jennifer's suggestion that we need to work at reparations in the church is that it takes me back, it captures my imagination. And it takes me to that passage in Isaiah where the people are called on to be repairers of the breach. So there's something very scriptural about reparations that complements the very scriptural notion of reconciliation as well. And I think when we pair reparations with reconciliation, it allows us to acknowledge our humanness in the best sense of the word, in the fullest sense of the word, that we have emotions, that we get angry, that we are hurt, that we are offended. This is connecting to the things that we heard in the stories. I'm thinking here how Erica talked about the reality of shame and how shame came out of the boarding school experience and was transmitted from one generation to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. You don't just get over that. That kind of damage, I don't know that it ever goes away. But if there are tools that can figure out how to help us fix what has been broken in our society to cause that kind of harm, then perhaps we'll be wiser the next time somebody is confronted with a statement that your existence is a problem for me, that we won't take that approach, that we will have learned something, at least I hope. Love as something that involves healing is another common thread that I heard woven in these stories. Living in the Jesus way, being open to God, to relinquish and release ourselves from emotional bondage. These are also, I think, some expressions or nods toward this traditional construction of agape, but it's different because it isn't simply about putting others' needs first. It's about paying attention to the integrity of community and paying attention to the integrity of relationship. In other words, what I hear us saying Christian love is for us as members and participants in Mennonite Church USA, as women in the Christian community, is that we're interested in how our experience of harm, evil, sin, and the way those things have been perpetrated against us in structural, systematic, and personal ways can be undone so that we don't hurt anymore. Again, how we figure that out, though, is a challenge, because when we get into the language of emotions, when we take our experience that seriously, that we talk about how we feel, there is no formula, there is no prayer, there is no liturgy, there is no nice, tidy way, no Sunday school illustration take-home paper that prepares us for what that work involves and what it looks like. So what does our understanding of the Christian gospel move us to say when the work of reparation is happening? That's something I'm not sure about. I don't know, I can't say. In some ways it's not my job, perhaps. What I can say is that you need yarn and knitting needles. One of the things that I've learned about knitting is it's kind of amazing how something that looks like that, it's just a string, can get turned into something that looks like this, just by putting it, wrapping it, or knowing how to wrap it and loop it around two little sticks. It's kind of a miracle. But the other way I've come to think about my little pastime of knitting, which I suppose is all just one big rationalization for the insane amount of money I spend on fiber, is that there's something biblical about this concept of taking a thread and turning it into something that looks like this. God is referred to in Scripture as a knitter, right? Can I get an amen? And you know, it is God who knit us in our mother's womb. There's a foreknowledge there. There is there's an awareness that you don't always get the gauge right, and maybe you end up with something that's a little too small or a little too big. It doesn't always turn out quite the way it looked on the picture of a pattern. So maybe in addition to yarn and knitting needles and some justice and some reparation, we need a little grace, or maybe we need a lot of grace. And maybe it is that love includes all of these things, and so all we do need is love. I don't know. But it seems to me that if that was true, we wouldn't be here, we wouldn't be having a conference because we'd all have figured this out by now. So it is more complicated. It does take practice. It takes experimentation. It takes persistence. These are all things that we heard in the stories that were told. If our existence is a problem for people, we have to figure out how to respond based on our understanding of the gospel, the integrity of the cosmic knitter, who purled and knitted us just right, even if the gauge is off a little bit. We are as we are intended to be, I think. Love is healing, living the Jesus way, being open to God, understanding that we are not an inconvenience or an accident. We are connected. There is something beautiful, and there is reason to hope. Perhaps out of this conference we may commission ourselves to be like Mary, to be apostles to the apostles, to say to the church, to leaders in the church, those who we entrust with power and authority to help us interpret the gospel. There are some ways that you aren't getting that message quite right. There are other witness accounts that are just as much part of the canon, just as much part of the experience of this vessel of the church. And we know that you love us, but we also need a little justice.